Britain is dying. Each day, thousands of strangers arrive on our shores and through our skies. Soul by soul and silently, our lands are filled with unsavoury characters of the worst moral depravity. Most of these people do not integrate, do not contribute, and instead only leech. Our wages are suppressed, our wealth is stolen, our throats are slashed, and our daughters are defiled. With our politicians refusing to intervene, often siding with the foreign scum, it is no wonder that many of our countrymen are fueled with burning rage. These bastards must be purged from our lands. Remigration would be a mercy. It is no wonder that such people turn to activism and protest, the last resorts of civilized men in response to such abhorrent barbarity. Yet, it is not the way. It will not bring the results one desires. With activism, you will not win. Watch this video to understand why, and to understand what can make a real difference. I suppose to begin this video, I ought to start from the frame of mind of one who does believe in the power of activism and protest. After all, who can blame them? We are tirelessly reminded of the many cases where activism and protests did appear to achieve their objectives. Among these, civil rights, female suffrage, decolonization, the end of apartheid, and even more recently, the activism of wokeness. Naturally, inevitably, unsurprisingly, the people on the right see this, have it drilled into them that these efforts work, and come to the conclusion that they too ought to adopt these efforts that appear to have been so successful for those on the left. Thus, we get this. Tommy Robinson, the Free Speech Union, Farage, the Great British Pack, run by a half. Plenty more pressure groups, dissident groups, people's armies, bulldog nationalism, and anything else like that. Now, I don't wish to deny that, for a lot of people, these groups have provided their lives with a lot of meaning and purpose, and allowed them to feel like they're doing their bit. The urge I'm sure we all feel to do something, anything, to stop the left-wing efforts to destroy our nation is palpable, and activism satisfies that urge. But I am not in the business of comfortable untruths. As someone who actually wants to get something done, something lasting and real, not just psychologically satisfying, all I actually care about is whether these efforts get us any closer to taking back control. So let's evaluate that. About 8 months ago, I made a video titled "Protesting Achieves Nothing." It's a good video, and I encourage you to give it a watch. Contained within are various reasons why protesting not only does not work, but actually only serves to harm the efforts of the right. Now, obviously I think that protest and activism for the right is worse than useless, but I ought to explain why that is, especially in the face of apparent left-wing victories through these means. Now, before I do, I appreciate that what I'm about to say next will be quite the philosophical cold plunge. This is like taking the red pill and waking up from the Matrix. Many people, when confronted with the hard truth that activism is fake and achieves nothing, reflexively reject reality to maintain their comfortable illusion. However, the evidence and reasons are there. So let's take a look at the aforementioned left-wing victories. Civil rights. As history now shows, the civil rights movement was not chiefly a bottom-up clamour for equality, but instead a bought and paid for top-down effort of the American bureaucracy. Why? Well, partially to win in the propagandistic Cold War effort against the USSR, but primarily to benefit the money power of America by providing justification for the mass importation of cheap foreign labour, among many other things. Female suffrage. Here, one must note that the suffragettes were not merely conducting peaceful protests, but instead conducting organised terror campaigns against the British state. But, more importantly, the British state was incentivised to bring women into the workforce, as this doubles the pool of labour. Decolonisation. Here, as detailed in the book I quoted from last time, decolonisation was not a case of Britain being economically incapable of maintaining the British Empire against the mass popular desire for independence. Rather, decolonisation was secretly forced upon us by America, and the colonial subjects didn't even want independence in the first place. Anti-apartheid. Here, though I'm sure the majority probably were against the apartheid measures, especially near the end, the government of South Africa was well within its means to continue said policies. Alas, it was under diplomatic pressure, by which I mean economic warfare, enemy-sponsored subversion, and thinly veiled threats, that forced South Africa to capitulate, not activist efforts. And lastly, the many efforts of woke. Here, we have surprisingly had it confirmed by none other than the American government itself that far from being organic bottom-up movements, woke activists were quite literally on the payroll of US aid, washed through various regime-controlled institutions, of course. Here too, this was done chiefly to benefit the ruling class, as they can make greater profits through the mass importation of cheap labour. I hope you're getting the picture now. Though at first it may have seemed that each of these was a case of bottom-up resistance against the state, the reality is the opposite. All of these movements succeeded because they had the backing of the state. However, this raises an obvious question. If, as I claim, the state actually wanted to do these things, then why didn't they, just do them? As those in my political sphere already know, nominally liberal democratic states operate through an insane web of misdirection. The many lies of the state and their various operatives exist for the sole reason of allowing the state to do things that are immensely unpopular. Let's take the case of mass immigration. Now, obviously mass immigration is deeply unpopular for a variety of reasons. But if you were the state, would you A, be honest about your desire to harness mass immigration to increase corporate profits by depressing wages through the mass import of cheap foreign labour, or B, claim that you feel a profound guilt over the sins of your ancestors, that we have a duty as a more developed nation to support the third worlders, and that, after all, diversity is our strength? Whilst the latter is, of course, infinitely more insufferable, there are many people who can be and have been fooled into it, and even as insufferable nonsense, it's better to claim to want these things with a pseudo-religious zeal than admit that it's naught but a cold-hearted play against the British public to increase your own power. Thus, all ideology spouted by the regime, bar none, ought to be thought of as a system of smoke and mirrors designed to obscure the true desires of the ruling elites. So too is the British Constitution a way to obscure the systematic balance and operation of true power. The ruling regime does not have an ideological and emotional attachment to anything other than its own power. It simply does not care for your opinion or your approval. It seeks to keep you contained and deluded, because it's easier to manage a population that approves of you than one that disapproves of you, but ultimately its only priority is the expansion and maintenance of its own power. This is why any effort to restore so-called common sense politics or constitutional reform is doomed to fail completely. The protests, the letters to MPs, the pressure groups, the political parties, the entryism, all will fail unless the regime already wants to go in the way you favour, and even then only temporarily. Naturally, this all sounds pretty bleak. There are practically no democratic means to influence the course of Britain's future. Anyone who is engaged in right-wing activism has done naught but waste their time, and frankly, they'd have been better off staying home. This is not a comfortable truth. It's depressing, blackpilling even. Alas, your despair is actually misplaced. There are things that you can and should do to change your future. Hope is not in the slightest bit lost. Now, I keep telling people to watch this because it's absolutely fundamental to any serious effort to effect change. The video I'm talking about is The Alarming Nature of True Power. In said video, my thesis is that true power is not about popularity or being correct, but chiefly about the ability to coerce. At the top line, power is ultimately the ability to cause change. And within that, there is an element of non-coercive persuasion, but no amount of persuasion will convince a nameless, faceless bureaucracy such as our own to give up the pursuit of its own incentives. Instead, one must learn to coerce, hence why I describe the nature of power as alarming. Now, coercion can take many forms, of course. If you have damning information over another person, you can coerce them through blackmail to do as you wish. Indeed, this is the cost of rising to any influential position in the regime, hence why entryism is very unlikely to succeed. Then there's coercion through economic destruction. If you can threaten to take your industry and capital abroad, you have true power. Or if you can threaten to halt the economy through mass strikes, you also have true power. And I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this is a value-free analysis, not a recommendation, but so too is the use of force a big part of true coercive power. Now, as much as I could talk about how the use of violence and blackmail against our enemies is morally justifiable, this is largely besides the point. One must live in reality, and in the present day, one cannot form a militia or mafia without being detained or worse by the state. Simply put, this is not an effective use of our talent and time. However, there are a number of things we can do and are doing. The first of these is to build networks. Through platforms such as the Basket Weavers, thousands of right-wing men and women have developed lasting interpersonal connections and a system of communal self-reliance. Then there are events like the Witten, which consistently contain the best of our lot, all in one location over a 3-day 2-night event. With such networks, we can and are building independent, self-reliant digital infrastructure such that we can resist the cancellation efforts of various state-influenced institutions and corporations, and foster and grow talent within our sphere, creating a solid core of wise and capable leaders. In time, we shall seek to establish a greater and greater physical presence, and this will lead to greater advantages and opportunities later on too. Now, I appreciate that these projects do not promise immediate or quick results. It is in my view that short-term immediate projects are doomed to fail, and that one must have an incredibly long time horizon if one is to make a lasting difference. At present, we also have the awkwardness of trying to avoid the Eye of Sauron, so much of what's going on is entirely unheard of outside of the 100 or so people actively involved in things. Yet, I can promise you, with hand on heart, that the efforts of our sphere are the best hope we have of carving out something permanent for our future. Yet, included in this video is an appeal. We are, at present, chiefly constrained by 2 factors: capital and the quantity of high-quality volunteers. If you are technically proficient, familiar with the ideas of the true right, and free enough to dedicate time to our projects, I'd suggest you first join Basket Weavers, then DM me. And even better whilst you're at it, buy tickets to the Witten. If, however, you do not have the time, capacity or desire to volunteer for us, which is ultimately understandable, then the single greatest thing you can give us is financial support. I hate to be a beggar, and I shan't ask you to donate any more than you would miss, but financial support is perhaps the greatest thing you can do for us. If you imagine everyone who's volunteered for Reform or gone on a Tommy Robinson protest, and you imagine that each of them gave us a small sum of, I don't know, £10 a month, we'd probably be able to do 5 times the amount we've done already. And for what it's worth, this doesn't have to be a pure donation. Support through channel membership, book purchases, tickets to the Witten, or, academic agency courses has the dual purpose of supporting us financially and giving you something out of it. So yeah, that about concludes things. To those wondering if they've just sat through a massive advert, well, at least you've learned things along the way. But no, in all seriousness, far too many people who consider themselves to be on the right utterly waste their time doing things that will never work, so they should either come into our sphere or extend to us their patronage, or failing that, just check out entirely and build things for themselves or those they care about. Naturally, I suspect that many people won't agree with my position, and that's a tragedy of the short form of YouTube content. I can either give you the full explanation over 5 hours and get 0 views, or give you a good enough concise version and reach a far larger audience. In exchange for going with the latter, I shall do my best to answer any questions or counterpoints in the comments. Beyond that, as usual, I recommend you to check out my other videos, like, share and subscribe if you like what I do, join my Discord, follow my Twitter, and otherwise just have a very nice day. And lastly, remember that as bleak as things may be, hope is never lost and the time to act is now. I'll see you in the next one. Cheerio.